TanStack Start. And I title a fresh take on React full stack application. I didn't want to say it's the best full stack meta framework, but you're gonna judge if you really like it. But the first question I want to ask you is, did it really need another React framework? I mean, we have so many JavaScript framework, and then we have React. There's the debate, is it a library, is it a framework? And then we have meta frameworks, frameworks built on top of frameworks. Okay, maybe that's a bit too much, but in this specific case, did we really need another one? I would say yes. Now, in general, having multiple options, it's usually good. Having too many might not, but I just took the biggest difference with Next.js, that Next.js focuses on server. It tells you to go server first, while TanStack Start has the opposite approach. It tells, use the client first, and then use the server only if you need it. And that's the splash screen you're going to see on the official website. And it presents itself as a full stack framework powered by TanStack Router. So there's the router and then the server. And it works for React and Solid. That's also a cool thing, that the core is framework agnostic. So technically, you could learn the TanStack Start primitives and use them. Well, you can already use them on both React and Solid, but it might be extended to other frameworks as well. Now, those are the strengths, and that's pretty much what I'm going to try to show you, that all of these are true and are valid, so that you can decide yourself if you want to give it a try. And just beginning by saying that the router using under the hood is the best router up to date. That's for real. You're going to enjoy the type safety. You're going to see how, through isomorphism, I'm going to explain what it is. You can better control the difference between what runs on the client and what runs on the server. And then we're going to see developer experience. It's cool to use, how easy it is to deploy. And, well, I cannot show you the community right now, but trust me, on Discord, they're super, super active. Now, as I said, Start is, in fact, the thin layer of server capabilities on top of TanStack Router. That's a single-page application router that works great. I wrote 80% because, you know, Pareto principle, 80-20 is always cool to use, but I don't have any data to say that it's 80 and 20 anyway. But the thing is, picking a router means defining a lot of your app architecture. It's not just how you load the pages. Like, for example, take the folder structure. If your router uses file-based routing, then the library you decided to do routing also decides how you structure your files. And this also falls down on how you nest the components, on your data lifecycle, and also on state management. So let's see what router can already do. What we're going to see in the next 10 minutes maybe is everything on the client. We can already do that on TanStack Router. It can already work on many frameworks, and it's on the client. Then we're going to see what TanStack Start adds in terms of server capabilities. Now here, what is going on? I've got a browser open on localhost 3000/hi/Leonardo/Verona, and there's a file that doesn't exist. And the file, if you see here, is similarly to the route. Hi, $name, and $city. Let me create a file. And by default, this code appears. And this is what you get for free every time you create a file that is inside the routes folder. And that's because there's a Vite plugin. We now know Vite really well. And there's a Vite plugin that takes care of that. So the initial boilerplate of your routes is automatically generated. And it's always annoying when you have to create a new file and look at the other route to copy the boilerplate. Now here, I intentionally use $name and $city just to show you an example that this is obviously how you can use path parameters. So now I use route.useParams to read the parameters of my route. But the first cool thing you're going to see is that params is not just an object or a record string. It is type safe. We know for sure that inside this route, I've got two parameters. One is name, and the other one is city. So type safety is one of the biggest selling points of TanStack Router and TanStack Start. You're going to see everything, really everything you can find in the application is going to be fully type safe and automatically inferred. That's kind of a quote I stole from Tanner, the creator of the library, that TypeScript isn't the same as type safety. Real type safety looks like JavaScript again. And keep that in mind, the second sentence, because I'm going to prove that, and it's going to be cool to see. For example, here, that's a link component. And as you can see, if you hover on the on the destination, you already have a list of all the possible routes in my application. And not only that, if I remove params, the params property, the link component is going to throw an error and say, no, params is required. But params is obviously not required on every route you have. But since this route has a path parameter, well, then TypeScript knows that. And it's going to tell you. So let me add it back. But the type safety is not just on path parameters and the links, the routes, but also on search params. And there's even more. If you think about it, the URL is kind of a global state manager, because all components can access the URL, they can read and they can write, and you can also listen to updates and subscribe to the URL. And also you get something for free, really. It is, you can set it on the bookmarks. You can bookmark the state of your application. And you can also refresh the page. You can move the state into a new tab as it's in the URL. And if you have a router helping you do all of that, well, you get a lot of features basically for free. So here's a silly example. If you had a component, a filtered list, and you want to set the filters, you might just want to use reactjsday. But you can obviously do better with TanStack router. With route.useSearch, you get the search parameters. But again, it's TanStack, so it has to be type safe. And guess what? Filters, once again, it's not just an object with strings or you don't know what it is. You have to guess what's in the search parameters. It's there. There's a type, and you're sure that everything is type safe, and you're 100% sure this object has exactly those fields. But TypeScript doesn't let you alone make sure that the type is correct, right? At runtime, you could do whatever you want, basically. So you might want to validate your data. And it's as easy as that. I'm just defining a Zod schema. Zod is probably the most popular schema library, but this supports the standard schema specification, so you can use Zod, Valibot, Archetype, and really your favorite schema library. And with that, you just pass to validate search your schema, and that's it. There's nothing you have to do. You have your URL parameter perfectly parsed and validated, and all the types are flowing down your application. There's another thing that flows down your application, and again, this is just the router. I'm only talking about routing library. It also works to do some dependency injection as a global context. What does that mean? Again, here's a code snippet. Here, I'm creating the root of my application. And you can see that in the before load, one of the lifecycle methods, by the way, you can run code before a route loads. Here, I got my context, and what is the context? Well, in this case, is query client. As if you use TanStack router, you probably already know TanStack query, and you better also use TanStack query. So here, I'm telling that on the before load of the root, I've got TanStack query. And I can do some operations like fetching the user and check the authentication. And here, I'm also returning the user session. What can I do with that? Let me go on another route. This time, I'm on my events. And here, since any route is children of the root, under my events, if I go on the context, I have the query client, obviously, but I also have the user session. So without having to do anything difficult, really, I was just returning the user session from the root of my application. And by default, I get for free in all the child routes the exact same object with the user session and the exact same query client, the same instance of the query client. And as a result, for example, I can use the query client to put in the cache other data that might be useful in the before load so that here I can load this page faster. And obviously, data loading, once again, is something deeply connected to routing. For example, if your router knows about data loading, you can preload during navigation or even before. Like when you hover with your mouse into the link, you can already fetch the data. But you can only do that if, in fact, the router knows that the page needs that kind of data. And obviously, TanStack router and TanStack query, once again, they're the perfect couple. But let me show an example, even without TanStack query, with just vanilla code. So here we got a slow function, takes a couple seconds to return. We have our route definition. Notice how in the loader property, I set my get slow data. So that's how I connect the route with the function loading the data. And here we got my simple component. And once again, the cool thing is that, okay, route.user loads the data, similar to use search params or use params. They show the type. Okay, now it's kind of boring. I keep showing the TypeScript types. But the cool thing here is that this is a JavaScript file. It's not a TypeScript file. And that's what real-time safety looks like JavaScript again. If your library takes care of all the typings, you don't need to write types. You have fully type-safe code without writing types. I think that's awesome, to be honest. And also, just look at that. You're calling a function that takes the type from the loader, that takes the type from the other function. It's pure magic, if you ask me. But how does that work? Well, here I'm on the homepage of this website, and I go onto the loader demo. I see a loading, and after a couple of seconds, I see the result. Now, let's focus on the second, 09. If I go back, and I go here again, it shows 09 as the seconds, and then it updates. So by default, uses the stale while write data approach. It gives you the old data if there is, and then it loads, it fetches the new data under the hood and updates when needed. But you might want it, or you might not. And you can obviously control a lot of stuff on this behavior. For example, you can set some stale time. Here, I'm just saying that for 10 seconds, I want to keep the state here, the data that I got from the loader. And I can also validate that through the DevTools. Because when you have the routing library that does so many different things, you might want some DevTools help you out and understanding what is going on. So here with my DevTools open, I can see that if I go on the loader, it is loading my data. Now it's available. And if I go back and I go back in, you can see that this is not going to change. Because I said that I got stale time to 10 seconds. So until the 10-second passes, I can still get my old data. Now, I said something just to waste 10 seconds. So if I go back on the home page, you can see that age is 20 seconds, stale time was 10. So if I go back here, stale while revalidate kicks in, and I get the new data. It's one of the million things you can do about data loading with just a routing library. But there's even more. I mentioned you can achieve preloading if you want. So here, default preload is false. This is where I define my router. And I can set intent. What does intent mean is that if the user is showing the intent to load a page, then maybe the data might need to be loaded. For example, if I hover my mouse on loader, you probably notice here that this thing appeared. Let me do that again. I go on loader, and it's already there. And as a result, as you might expect, if I now go on loader, the result is already there, as it was in the router cache. But let's move on. I could say a lot of other cool things we can do with TanStack router alone, but we're here also to talk about full stack, right? So the overall suggestion is keep it an SPA, do client side as long as you can. I mean, you don't necessarily need to start with a full stack framework. Like, also the React guide tells you, okay, you want to learn React, use Next.js. Well, no, not necessarily. So keep it simple if you can. But at some point, it's totally understandable that you might need server-side rendering for full document. You can also do streaming and partial stuff. But you also might need server function. It's cool to have your backend logic inside your front-end code base. It's handy. And also enables end-to-end type safety. I already said dozen times, everything on TanStack is type safe. So having your server function in the same code base of your front end makes it easy and obvious to have everything fully typed. You're not just calling, fetching an API and hoping for the best, but you're actually calling a function that you know returns a specific shape of object. And also you might need public endpoints. So it totally makes sense, and we're going back to TanStack Start, which by default, which by the way, if you see that RC in the right side stands for release candidate, which means it's been a huge work under the hood by the maintainers. We're in the release candidate phase, and version 1 of TanStack Start is going to come really soon. So it's really the best way to give it a try. And if you started with TanStack Router, your single-page application, you want to go on TanStack Start, how can you migrate? Well, that's basically it. You change a couple of files, and since TanStack Start is a Vite plugin, you can just swap the Vite plugin, and voila, you've got your full-stack application. Think about it, how cool it is that a full-stack framework is actually a Vite plugin. That's kind of a powerful ecosystem. But now we swapped our Vite plugin. We are now on a full-stack application, and we can do server-side rendering. But in the concept of a client-first application, we want to still keep the benefits of a single-page application. So server-side rendering in TanStack Start is maybe not as you might expect, but it makes sense. So the first time you load your page is going to be rendered on the server. So you can, for example, do that for SEO if it still makes sense in the era of AI, probably yes. It supports streaming. But then, once you're already in the application and you navigate through the links of the application, it goes client-side. So you can get all the benefit of a client-side single-page application. It's super fast, super smooth, and you can do a lot of cool things with the preloading, like the demo I was showing. And obviously, you can customize all of that. You can decide what you want to do. As the core idea is that everything is isomorphic by default. What does that mean? The code you write on your TanStack Start application technically can run on both the server and the client. It's going to go on both bundles by default. But you can obviously control that. And you can decide, OK, this function has to run on the client, this function has to run on the server. So you can make save code and access the database, for example. Or you can have different behaviors for the exact same function to behave differently on the server and on the client. I'm going to show that in a second. Like here, I added this simple snippet as there's kind of a misconception. The route loader can run on both the client and the server. It's not always on the server. By default, you can customize that. So you cannot access the database here, but I'm going to show you what you can do. These are the primitives that lets you control what runs where. So you can create a client-only function, an isomorphic function, or a server-only function. I made up a simple example just to show you the idea. I'm setting the team management of my application on local storage. And local storage is obviously not available on the server. It's a client API. So you might want to define a getStoredUserTeam that is isomorphic. On the server, it's just going to return the string system. But on the client, well, that's where you can access local storage, and you can do your logic, like get the team, parse it with Zod, you can do whatever. But this is not going to fail. You're not going to call functions on the server that fail because local storage is not defined, or you don't need to add an if statement if window is undefined, which does pretty much the same thing, but why writing if Windows is undefined when you can just define two different behaviors. And obviously, you can do something similar for client-only functions. In this case, if you call this function from the client, it's going to work. If you call this function from the server, it's going to throw an error. And the error is not going to be local storage is not defined, because that's not the real problem. The problem is that you call a function that was meant to run on the client. And if you use this primitive, you can achieve that. But it probably makes more sense, and it's easier to explain with the server-only function. If you're accessing secrets, you don't want to use secrets on the client. It shouldn't leak on your client bundle. So if you use your secrets inside server-only function, you're 100% sure that this function is only going to be on the server bundle, and it's never going to reach the client bundle. So you're safe to use them. But same for the client function. If I call this server-only function on the client, it's going to throw an error. So I cannot access the database from here. What can I do? Well, server functions are a special implementation of an isomorphic function. Server function runs only on the server, but it automatically exposes an HTTP endpoint so that you can call it from the client. And the cool thing is that in your code, you just write this. Just await get data, and if you're on the server, it calls the function. If you're on the client, it fires a fetch call and returns you the data. So the code is safe on the server. How can you build it? Just create a server function. You might want to validate your input, as it's kind of a fetch from the client, so you want to make sure that the data is fine. But that's pretty much how you're going to do in the real world. Just pass a ZOD schema. Again, you set the ZOD schema into the input validator, and here you can access the database and call the function and get your data. So they expose HTTP endpoints. You might need authentication. And that's what middlewares are for. Middleware is a function that runs before and after your server function, useful for authentication, observability, and other cool stuff. And they're chainable, they can control the request, they can modify the data. So there's basically kind of a reusable logic you can hook into the server function. You can define one with the same syntax. And here, notice .server, this is only going to run on the server. As I said, you can use a middleware inside a server function. So here I've got my, oops, sorry. Okay, so here I got my middleware that can use other middlewares and can pass the data. For example, the first one, I showed it super quick. It was returning the user session, and again I get my user session also here into this server function. You also have server routes, like server function expose endpoints, but only to be used from the client by calling the function. If you want to define an actual public endpoint, you can do that. Just set a file route, and through the handlers, you can answer to GET request, POST request. So super easy, and as usual, you get parameters. That's one of the coolest things. Now, let's put it on the internet. It's cool if you do things all local, but you also want to deploy, right? And you have hosting adapters, obviously. You can use Netlify or Cloudflare, their official adapters, or through Nitro, you can deploy literally anywhere. And how can I deploy Netlify? Again, we're on Vite, so I can just add the Netlify adapter on my Vite config, and that's basically it. I can create my application, and it goes live. If the browser of VS Code kind of load the page. Okay, awesome. So just an example, this is the project I'm using for the demo, and it's hosted on Netlify. There's a public URL. You can have a look. But if only I had a limited time, there's a million other advanced features I want to show. It might be a separate or 10 separate sessions. How much time do we have? 5 minutes. I don't have a limited time. So I'll be super quick because I go to the ending. But I want to show some. Like, take this, not going to show everything, just keep with you the idea that you can do that. Like, you got query client on the loader, you can preload stuff to load pages faster. You can use your loader data into the head component so that on the server you can use your data to SAO. For example, you have a page for a community and you can use the community name for the meta tags. You can do authentication, just throw a redirect, and all the routes inside profile are automatically protected. It works super fine with AI. If you also write a copilot instruction agents.md, it works better, but it's perfectly fine. It's TanStack router has 2 years, so it's already into all major LLMs. You have server function, so you can just create an OpenAI client and use LLMs inside your application. Why not? You have a server, you can use AI. And you can create file routes. So what is an MCP server if not just a route and an endpoint used by an LLM? So you can create file routes for endpoints. You can create an MCP server. And this is 300 lines because I didn't even use any library. I just threw in the full specification manually. I was studying it and worked great. But what about React Server components? That's another interesting topic. What's a React Server component? This is the dreaded example of running a SQL into a React application. But it basically returns serialized data to the client with data baked in. And if you look closely, it's just another way to fetch data in React. So if you mix UI with data, you have the same issues as loading data, like caching, staleness, error handling, and managing the loading state. TanStack query might be the answer to do that. Now, they're not supported yet. They're not going to come in version 1. But the overall idea is to think React Server component, not just an entire paradigm shift, but rather just another way of fetching data, in this case, for a client-first app, even though they run on the server, obviously. But is this production ready? I mean, talking tech is cool, but we have to ship features and deliver stuff, right? TanStack router, yes, absolutely. Version 1 has 2 years almost. It has 1 million weekly downloads, super stable, highly recommend. TanStack Start, okay, let's be honest. I told you it's on release candidate stage. The APIs are stable, but it's right before version 1. You might want to be on the safe side, but if you're creating a new side project, just go for it. If you're creating a small, medium project, you can give it a try. It's stable nowadays. What can you do? Getting started with TanStack Start. Super simple, as usual. You have all the npm commands. You can do from scratch. You have migration guides. But here's the coolest way to start TanStack Start application through the Visual Builder. Now, terminal takes a couple seconds to load. I can run this command that is create TS router at latest, because I want to use the latest version on a live demo. So if they released an update like 2 hours ago, this is going to explode. But I like the risk of it. And with the UI flag, what I'm doing is instead of creating the new app by selecting stuff on the terminal, which works perfectly fine, this is a TanStack router application that runs just locally and you can use to configure your builder. For example, you can select the name, you can go on file router if you want to use Start, and you also have a live preview. For example, I said that both router and Start are Vite plugins. So here, by default, there's the TanStack router plugin. But I want to create a Start application. I tick Start. There it is, TanStack Start. Default host it's hosted on Nitro. Well, I wanted to host on Netlify. I tick Netlify. There it is, Netlify plugin. And this really works for all the possible, or many supported integration. Like you can spin up an MCP server, you can decide you want to use Prisma, and you get an example of Prisma file. So basically, creating and scaffolding an app is super simple because you have this awesome visual builder. And going to the conclusion. If you want to learn more, Well, first of all, the official documentation. That's something we often forget as a developer, especially now that we have AI, we just ask AI. But there's the official documentation written by the developers working on the application, working on the code, and it's awesome. Just first of all, look at the documentation. Then there's an awesome list I maintain myself on GitHub. I list tutorials, examples, boilerplates, everything about TanStack Start made by the world. I have a list of cool resources. You can have a look. GitHub repos. If you search for Start, it's actually a package in the TanStack router repository, just in case you don't find it. And I highly recommend joining the Discord server, as the team is super, super active. There's always happy to help you, to answer questions, to fix bugs, because the open source project also live and thrive through the community. So be an active community member. And this is the slide I was showing at the beginning. I hope I've been able to show you all of that, the router, the type safety, how to control client and server without use client and use server, how much the framework helps you, deployment is easy, and you have to trust me, the community is great. I couldn't show the community on the presentation. So just say that, let your type safe full stack adventure begin. Thank you.